Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special as we're joined by two distinguished educators. First, we want to introduce Dr. Rosalind Jeffries. She is an arts educator, curator, and someone who has basically celebrated the rich history through art. And next to her is her husband, known as our distinguished historian, educator, and activist, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, as they both discuss our history, our culture, and the need for us to continue the study of African history. Are you ready? Well, I am. Let's go. How did you meet each other? How did you meet?
I went to Africa in 1960 with Operation Crossroads Africa. And when I came back, in those days, most people didn't know that much about Africa. In fact, a lot of people were trying to keep Africans and African Americans apart, telling each other things that were not necessarily pleasant. But when I came back, I was just astounded from that trip. I lived in Harlem. I was born and raised in Harlem. Grew up on 115th Street. And I talked Africa to all of my friends so much until they were kind of tired of me and sick of me. And so I was looking for someone who would understand what I was saying. So the next year, 1961, Leonard went to Operation Crossroads Africa, and when he came back, he was down at the United Nations speaking for the group, and I ran down as fast as I could get there to listen to the group, and I saw this handsome man that was like the handsomest man in the whole world, and there he was talking, and so I said, oh, I have to get to know him. And so during those days, Patrice Lumumba was in the Congo, was in the newspaper a lot. And so I vowed that after the talk, I didn't hardly understand a word he said because he was just so handsome to me. And so I managed to get to him and get his phone number to say that, oh, I'm going to plan a program on the Congo and I would like you to be the speaker. And so he ended up coming, but he came with his big hefty girlfriend, and she was very brainy. And so I said, oh, wow, he likes those kind of ladies. And so I said, I cross him off my list. Boom. I'll have to forget about him because I considered myself more artistically inclined as an artist and art historian than super academic.
Right.
So we end up getting together, how, Leonard?
Right, because Operation Crossroads Africa was a program set up by an African American from Knoxville, Tennessee, and he became a preacher. And his base was Harlem, and so he had the Church of the Master, and he wanted it to be a community church. So, and an international church. And so he had a summer program that people went away. He had various other ministers coming in. It was a community activity. But when you go on the program, and when I first heard him, I went to college at a football weekend, and then I went down to see the chaplain. And then it was a white fellow, Chaplain Curry, because Lafayette College only had 5 black students. So I was one of them. And so that's when I met Reverend Robinson. I went to the manse, knocked on the door, And when it opened up, there's a white fellow, Chaplain Curry, greeting me and immediately pointing to me and saying to the black man next to him, "That's a man for your program." And so from that point on, I went with Dr. Robinson across the campus, and he spoke about the challenge of Africa. And I was 1,500 white boys and a few of us. I knew that message was for me. I was in tears of joy on, the importance of Africa. And so that established this very close relationship with Reverend Robinson. Well, Rosalind had that relationship before I even met her. And then Crossroads says, you've got to speak, you've got to take the message, you've got to come back and share. And so Rosalind was saying that, what she was saying, that was a good process for her. And since the UN, and Patrice Lumumba was murdered in 61.
And Crossroads had an office at that time, 155th Avenue downtown. Mm-hmm. And so from the office, 3 of us were sent out to speak
lecture
on behalf of the organization to win people to go the subsequent years. Myself, so that's how we got together. We were programmed together, had the same mentors. And so the other person of the trio was Richard Hope, from the famous Hope family in Georgia. And so the 3 of us...
University.
Atlanta, yes.
His grandfather was John Hope, the president of Morehouse.
And Leonard was up at Columbia University. And so that was the way we got there. We had the same mentors. So that we end up knowing John Henry Clark. We end up knowing Dr. Ben. We end up knowing Elliot Skinner, who had become ambassador to Upper Volta back then, Burkina Faso. And there was Franklin, Dr. Franklin, what I'm telling you.
Right.
And so anyway,
Franklin Williams.
That's right.
Dr. Franklin Williams, Ford Foundation.
That's right, Ford Foundation, and there were other organizations that were pro-international relations. And so these kinds of people were our mentors. They were older than us, and we were young whippersnappers. And so, and they were eager to have people like us to be their adjutants, to, carry their bags, so to speak, and be around to help.
I actually have a book. Elliot Skinner, before he became ambassador, he went on Crossroads twice. He helped to build the picture that Charles had in Ivory Coast. That was his project. He led the group in 60. Rosalind was in Nigeria. He was in the Ivory Coast, and they built a schoolhouse. And when I came the next year, they showed us what the project of the previous year was. But Dick Hope had gone to Senegal, and then he was at Columbia to get his master's, and we were in the same program. And Elliot Skinner wrote a fantastic book on Africa, and I have it in the library, and he wrote that he and others have worked with us and helped us grow and develop, and they were waiting for us to make our contribution.
Now, another key factor was that we were both urbanites, basically, that came from all black neighborhoods and then moved out into the academic world in the schools or colleges. But so that Leonard was Newark, born and raised on the blocks that were all black.
Black power.
And I was Harlem born, in Harlem Hospital, raised 115th Street between Lenox and Fifth Avenue, which was like being born in the Mecca of the Harlem Renaissance, post-Harlem Renaissance. So I had a kind of talented 10th attitude and upbringing. Leonard Northern had a little bit of that, but also Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington oriented. But I was more Paul Robeson, That block that I live in was very, very interesting. I was there before the projects were built. And so the building that I lived in had Father Divine and Daddy Grace both in the same building. And when they tore the buildings down to create
Projects.
the projects, a lot of the people scattered and they became disillusioned, but they became devoted to a new group altogether, which was the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam Temple number 7 was on the corner of 116th Street. Malcolm X every Saturday would be on his soapbox preaching 115th Street, a half a block away from where I lived. And so I heard him as I went to get the groceries, like every Saturday. And then after hearing him, I would go with my cousins, who were Paul Robeson, musically inclined. And he would take us down to the Opera House, downtown New York City. And so that if you're talking about a wide range, that wide range is what Leonard and I had in common. The love of a black community where people were vibrant and interested in black history. So in a sense, we didn't have to go searching for blackness or for Africa. It would be like a fish swimming in water trying to find where's the water.
Talk to us, Rosalind, about your impression of the Black is Beautiful movement and your experience while living in Harlem.
There were these black movements, but to me they were an extension of the Harlem Renaissance, the post-Harlem Renaissance, because at the turn of the century there was these negative characters from Hollywood, from everywhere. We were looking for the positive. And the Harlem Renaissance was a rebirth, naissance, and of trying to find out exactly who you were. So when the 1960s came, it was just another level of people trying to reassure the blackness or the Africanness of who we were in a manner that was unapologetic. Wouldn't have to apologize for who we were. What I think of what was going on at that time was education, the curriculums of inclusion. What was going on was CIBI, right?
Right.
CIBI?
Yes.
And independent black schools. Independent black schools were a part of the culture, teaching people I am an African, and from kindergarten straight up. And it was that changing of the mind that was so important. And then along with that was Black Studies. And so Leonard can tell us about the kinds of people who were on Black Studies, in Black Studies, that had to do with both the culture and the politics and economics.
We left New York in 1968. They wanted to celebrate Malcolm X, I believe it was 68 or 69. And they invited some of us to come to celebrate our great leader. But we hit the East Coast, New York, and our African experience and whatnot, hit the West Coast. And so we set up the first complete expansive Black Studies department. And so who was in our class? The runners who had been raising the black fist, John Carlos and Tommy Smith. John Carlos was in my wife's class because they had us come out to a conference and they saw the potential we had, so they made us an offer to leave New York and to go out to California. But that dynamic of the people raising their fists. That was a part of this that 60s. And then black people were becoming more conscious with the urban rebellions and the explosions that took place, and how would we respond. And so when we left to go to the Gary, Indiana conference, and Rosalind was mentioning there were thousands of people, but very few had a dashiki. I had a dashiki made by my secretary in the department. And then Rosalind had her hair braided, but it wasn't just braided. She had long hair, and she created a necklace of braids around it. So people were snapping her picture because of that. But it was great to see a national connection and an international connection, which is what the Pan-African movement and what Carlos Cook's and the Marcus Garvey legacy was.
Now, at that same year, you also had the National Conference of Artists in Chicago, and it was jammed. When they saw me with my hair braided, oh my goodness, the people just went wild. They stopped the conference and started to braid each other's hair. Of course, they knew it as children, but not as an adult. The hair braided like that and with large earrings, in an adult form. So I was like a walking and talking performance art piece.
Now, as we reflect on this and as we kind of come to a close, I want you to think about that little girl, little boy sitting in the audience and who might be thinking, well, what is the importance of history? Right now we're in 2020, we are dealing with this pandemic. What is it from our history we could use as an anchor to take us on in this moment in time?
Well, if you are, and we're both educators, in other words, Rosalind, when I met her, she was teaching in the junior high school. And so education is so important. Whoever controls the education controls the sense of purpose, direction. And that process is called socialization and acculturation. We are socialized in this American society to be consumers of garbage and to spend and not save. And so the more success we had, the more other people said, well, we're going to make sure we get that success. But when the Black Power movement got going in the 50s and in the 60s, and the Black Arts movement, it spread. For example, in Newark, New Jersey, Amiri Baraka had been in the bohemian world and had done some of his strong writings. But in the early 60s and into the late 60s, he developed Spirit House, which was a complement to the Grandessa models. They had the clothes designed, et cetera, and they had an institution. And then Milana Karanga, who came out of the struggle on the Los Angeles with us and the Panthers, but then he went into deep culture, and they developed a whole line of clothing and materials, etc. Then when Barbara Ann Teer and her sister, when they were attracted to Africa, they picked up wholesale and left and went to Nigeria. And so Roz and I had a chance to go to Nigeria and actually visit them. But what they did was, eventually they came back and they brought back the culture with them. And so the culture was alive. It was not something that you just put on your wall and something that you admired. And it was alive. And that helped to save us into the 60s from getting lost into the black exploitation, because other folks saw the power of this blackness. The East had a whole situation in the same time where they were teaching the babies, and they had the culture, and they had the drumming, and they had the dancing. And so that, fortunately, that sustained itself through the period of black exploitation, where they came up with Superfly and all those other things to take us away from that African. And then it renewed itself with the Black Studies movement.
Thank you.
Okay, I would say that my advice to the younger generation is forget about the violence. that you have to have peace within yourself. Self-destruction, suicide, and you know, as nasty as you want to be was the name of one of those albums that was just so bad. Do not sell your soul for filthy lucre. People who assimilated sex just for the money, uh, the idea of the evil image and evil doings affect your mind and your soul. I would say, young people, you have to know that you were created to be supernatural. That's not just regular, but supernatural within your God force. And that you must find a way to get to that God that loved you more than you loved yourself, more than you love yourself in the individual and also in the collective, that you were meant to carry on from generation to generation and to longevity. Don't think that you're going to just live fast and die young and have a beautiful corpse. No, that's not the answer. That as difficult as things were during the slaving era, and they were horrendously horrible, yet there was a force bigger and greater than us that got into Abraham Lincoln to make him move on our behalf. Just know that the world will move on your behalf if you maintain what's called mayat in ancient Egypt, meaning the balance, and stick to it. Just stay up. Some people say you fall down, you get up. No, you don't fall down. Your God is there to keep you up everlasting on your feet and in action. So that another thing, young people, do not compromise away who you are for the sake of getting with other ethnic groups and other racial groups. Love them on equal terms. Do not sell yourself out to other ethnic groups. Yes, you must know them. Know that you are African and American, but not just African American. You are global. The originators. Others came out of you, and you were so valuable. That's why they wanted to rape Africa of its land, its people, and its mineral wealth. I'm just saying that these are the facts of life if you want to survive in one piece, in the manner and the form with the gifts that God gave you at birth.
And just to add to the point that Rosalind has made, as we move through life and we come on these different circumstances. When we moved to San Jose, that was another world, but we brought the New York and the African experience to the West Coast. So we were able to develop this enormous Black Studies program. Within the first month, we had Carlos and John Carlos and the others in our classroom. Carlos was in my class and he was in Rosalind's class. But they had set up these programs of consciousness and entertainment. So who came within a week or two that we were there? Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory came, and he had gotten more serious from the comedic point. He was now talking about running for the president and eating right and whatnot. But every month, he came a couple of times a month. He was like a visiting lecturer. After a month, he read Rosalind and I's Spirit. And he had never been to Africa. His beautiful wife had never been to Africa. But he asked us to take his two oldest children, Lynn and Michelle, 11 years old, to Africa. Now, you're just meeting a couple, you are reading their spirit, and you're offering your children, and that was the greatest thing that happened to us in our trip.
There's one thing I would like to say to the young people in the name of Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory was a close friend of Leonard's relatives in Kelly, Georgia.
Right, and, the Browner brothers.
He was vitally interested as an athlete, yes, a runner, the way that Herbert Daughtry would run for a political cause,
Right.
would fast as well. But the idea of fasting and your diet, Dick Gregory taught us about the food, and we find that this younger generation is eating so much synthetic stuff that's not food. Not food. You have to look at the label and keep reading that label and study the science of food, and because your body will not be able to support a proper soul and a proper spirit if it's nothing but a pile of junk. And if you never go on fast, you never go on detox. You need to detox twice a year. When the season change, that's a little time for you to detox and take on the next season. If you're going to come into the fall, you need to eat a lot of squash and pumpkin and things that's being offered. If you come into spring, strawberries, So eat the season and you'll be in sync with the God who created the seasons. And that's what we have lost, being so modern, looking at the skyscrapers, the glass buildings, and the steel. We forget that there is such a thing as human law. You can't fast food. You can't live on the fast food stuff that's loaded with hormones that to make a chicken grow fast or a cow grow fast, and it's so aggravated it gets nothing but cancers, and then you drink cancerous milk and think it's fine, So
And luckily,
it's a serious study as to what food is in what neighborhoods and the quality of what it is.
I just want to, first of all, on behalf of Cultural Caravan, say that we salute your work. We salute your contribution to our collective history. We salute the symbolism that you have in terms of the importance and the celebration of Black love, African love, and love of self and love of community. And we salute you and thank you so much for joining us on this very special edition of Cultural Caravan. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, and to tell a friend. And please visit our website at www.ccptv.org. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you.